He forgot who built the foundation. He thought a brochure could erase me.
He slid the brochure across the dinner table like it was just another piece of mail, like it didn't carry the weight of every unspoken insult, every buried resentment, every time he thought he was better than me. The front said Bright Grove Senior Living, peaceful, private, comfortable. My son looked me in the eye and said, "It's time you start thinking about this, Dad." Then he picked up his fork and went back to eating. And for the first time in my life, I felt like a guest in my own home. Before we continue, if you've ever been underestimated, if someone close ever mistook your silence for weakness, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and drop a comment below. This story will remind you. Sometimes the quietest man at the table is the one holding the detonator. My name is Frank Miller. I'm 62 years old. I live just outside Dayton, Ohio, 15 minutes from the old Air Force Museum, where the massive hangars gleam silver under morning sun. I built my life here, built homes for other people too, drywall, roofing, plumbing. If you've lived in Montgomery County long enough, chances are you've walked through a house I worked on. This house, the one my son just tried to exile me from, I built it with my own hands in 1991. 2x4s, sweat, bare-knuckle work. I remember every board. I remember standing out here in the raw winter, breath steaming, hammer ringing, thinking, this is for my family. This is where we'll be safe. That night, after he went to bed, I sat in the living room for a long time. No TV, no hum of appliances, just the slow heartbeat of the old clock ticking over the fireplace. The faint smell of pine from the Christmas wreath still clinging to the doorframe, even though January had already started to gray the snow outside. My hands were shaking, but not from age, from restraint, because the thing he forgot, the thing he never even bothered to learn, is that I never signed this house over to him. I might be old, but I'm not done. Back when his mother passed, God rest her, I tried to be strong for him. I still remember the day we lowered her down, the way his tie kept twisting in the wind, how he looked like a boy trying to play man. He was just 23, fresh out of college, barely making anything, still chasing a startup dream with no brakes and no budget. I let him move back in, cleared space in the basement, patched the drywall down there, painted it soft gray so it wouldn't feel like a cave. Told him he could stay rent-free until he got on his feet. Bought him his first Ford F-150 when his old Civic died in the middle of a job interview. I told him, just pay it forward when I'm older. He smiled then, warm and grateful, and said, "Of course, Dad, you don't even have to ask." The first cracks came quiet. He started asking me to co-sign. Nothing big at first, a business credit card for tools, then a small loan for equipment. Just until cash flow improves, I signed. Of course I did. Fathers want to believe. Fathers want to help. Then came the bigger asks. A second card. A line of credit tied to the house. "I'll pay it off in 6 months," he said. That was 6 years ago. At first, I barely noticed the shift. The mail still landed in the same metal box by the road, still had the same creak when I opened it each evening. But the envelopes started to change. Thicker, official, printed with banks I didn't recognize. More with his name, but my address. I told myself it was nothing. Startup stuff. Paperwork. Everyone hustles. Everyone juggles. Then one day an envelope arrived. Heavy, stiff, with a seal from the county courthouse. I stood in the driveway holding it. The Ohio sky low and slate-colored. The smell of wet leaves from last fall still rotting near the curb. I opened it right there. It was a notice of default. He'd missed payments on a loan, one I didn't even know existed, using the house as collateral. That night, I didn't eat. I sat at the kitchen table like a man waiting for a confession. My dinner cooled, untouched. The house was too quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and my own pulse in my ears. When he finally came in, smelling faintly of beer and cold air, I slid the paper toward him. He brushed it off, said it was a misunderstanding, that it would be cleared up next week. Then he laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Relax, Dad. You won't be around much longer anyway. Let me handle it." That sentence, it stuck to my ribs, like a nail driven just deep enough to hold. I wanted to explode, to slam my fist on the table, to remind him whose roof he was under, but I didn't. Still, I held my tongue. I wanted to believe he'd come around, that this was just stress or ego or some kind of late 30s crisis. I wanted to believe that the boy I raised, the one who once fell asleep on my shoulder after Little League games, was still in there somewhere. But that brochure proved otherwise. You don't slide something like that across the table unless you've already made up your mind. You don't hand your father a nursing home flyer unless you've decided he's in the way. After he went to bed, I walked into the garage. Cold air seeped through the thin gap under the door, and the concrete floor bit into my bare feet. I moved aside the fishing poles leaning against the wall and opened the old steel toolbox I hadn't touched in years. Not the one with wrenches and sockets. The one with files. The one I'd labeled Keep in black marker the day I buried his mother, because I knew someday I'd need to remember who I was. Inside were things he'd never bothered to ask about. Original deed, edges yellowed but still crisp. Life insurance beneficiary forms, power of attorney forms, unsigned. Bank documents showing every payment I ever made on this house, and one more. Thin, a manila envelope with his signature on it from 2014, when he asked me to help him incorporate his LLC. My name, listed as 51% owner. He never changed it. He didn't even remember. I sat there on the cold floor for a long while, the fluorescent bulb buzzing faintly above. My breath made pale ghosts in the garage air. My hands were steady now, cold, but steady. For the first time in years, I felt something return, the old craftsman's focus, the way I used to study blueprints before a build. Quiet, deliberate, patient. Over the next week, I started moving differently. I woke before he did, slipped out while the house still smelled like coffee grounds and last night's takeout, went to the bank while he was at work, had copies made, asked careful questions that left no trace, met with a lawyer a friend from church recommended, a sharp, soft-spoken man with silver hair and a habit of straightening his pen before speaking. We sat in his small office with dark wood shelves and a faint smell of old books and fresh toner. I told him my story, one fact at a time, steady as driving nails. He nodded, took notes, and didn't interrupt except to clarify dates. At night, I'd sit across from my son at the same dinner table, the same table where he'd pushed that brochure. He'd talk about his new investment property and how he might finally propose to Megan. He'd use words like equity and leverage and expansion. I nodded. I waited. I listened. But inside, I was drawing blueprints. Not for a house, for a reckoning. I pulled every bank statement, every shared account. I documented every payment I'd made, down to the cent. I printed text messages where he admitted using my name. I even dug out the birthday card he gave me 2 years ago, the one with golf clubs on the front and his own handwriting inside. "Thank you for always covering my back, even when I mess up. I owe you everything." He signed it with a smiley face. That smiley became Exhibit A. One night, when the house was silent except for the distant hum of the furnace, I slipped the manila envelope back into his desk drawer. I set it right on top of his future business plans folder, the one he liked to show Megan when he was feeling ambitious. I wanted him to glance at it, to touch it, to feel nothing, to keep forgetting, because soon he'd remember everything. It's funny, the things you remember when someone finally shows you who they really are. Like how, 5 years ago, I drained my savings to help him cover a down payment on a commercial lease he swore would change everything. I still remember the day he pitched it to me. We were sitting on the back porch. Rain was sliding off the edge of the roof, plinking into the rusted gutter. He was excited, hands moving fast, words tumbling out about square footage and future clients, and how this would be our breakthrough. His eyes were bright, the way they used to be when he was 10 and building tree houses out back. I remember the hollow clink of my old lockbox as I opened it later that night, the smell of paper and steel, years of small, careful savings stacked like secret bricks. I counted out what I could spare, fingers trembling a little because I knew this was more than money. This was trust. Or how, when he got behind on taxes, I pulled that same lockbox out again. This time it felt heavier, not in weight, but in what it meant. $8,400 in cash, crumpled bills from overtime jobs, late nights spent finishing drywall in houses that weren't mine. I handed it to him and said, "Don't worry, you've got time to repay me." And he hugged me like he meant it, like he wasn't just tucking my future into his pocket with no intention of ever giving it back. The bank statements told me a different story. $6,200 charged to my card for furniture, leather couch, bar setup, a networking wine fridge. $3,100 for business meals that took place at high-end restaurants I'd never stepped foot in. Multiple withdrawals just under the $10,000 reporting threshold, and not one penny sent back my way. I didn't say a word. Not then. Not yet. But the mask he wore in public, it started cracking in private. He began cutting me off in conversations, correcting me when I spoke in front of his girlfriend. One night, at dinner, she asked where he learned to handle drywall so well. And that was our trade, my hands bleeding on cold mornings so he could watch and learn. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Self-taught." And then he smiled. "You have to understand, I'm not a man who seeks applause. My life has been lived in utility boots, not Italian loafers. I don't need people to clap when I walk in a room." But that moment made something cold settle into my chest. The first legal move I made was subtle. I removed my name from the secondary credit line we shared and froze the account. I didn't tell him, didn't warn him. Let him find out when it declined mid-luxury dinner with his friends. I pictured the waiter coming back, awkward smile, card in hand. I pictured my son's face, the flush of embarrassment, the scramble for another card. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel petty. I felt awake. Then I visited the county recorder's office. The place smelled like old carpet and toner, and the clerks moved slow, deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. I slid the property search form across the counter and said, "Miller, Frank, 1991 build." The woman tapped at her keyboard, printer humming. A minute later, she handed me papers. The property deed, still in my name. Apparently, he'd been so confident in his assumed control that he never bothered to verify actual ownership. While there, I paid a small fee for certified copies of the title and tax history. $1,834 total. That's what it cost to prove what he thought he owned. Wasn't his at all. That weekend, he hosted a small gathering in the backyard. Megan, a few buddies, some woman from the HOA board he was trying to impress. I grilled steaks, ribeyes, thick and marbled, the way he's always liked them. Smoke curled into the cool evening air. The cicadas buzzed, late summer loud. They drank wine I couldn't pronounce, poured from bottles with labels fancier than anything I'd ever bought. At one point, I heard him bragging about his latest property flip. His voice carried easily, just loud enough for me to hear while I stood over the grill. Then someone asked who owned the house. He didn't hesitate. "Me? Of course." I stood at the edge of the patio, holding a tray of ribs slick with sauce, and smiled. Not bitter, not loud, just quietly. The next morning, I printed every utility bill from the last 5 years. The printer rattled and hummed, spitting out sheets with my name bold across the top. Gas, water, electric. I highlighted the account holder line on each one. Neon yellow, steady hand. Then I filed them neatly into a binder marked retention. The act was oddly calming, like measuring twice before cutting a board. No rush, just preparation. Then came the hard part, emotionally, not legally. I had to face the part of myself that allowed this to happen, because I wasn't just dealing with betrayal. I was dealing with guilt. I raised that boy. I showed up to every game, no matter the weather. Stood on cold metal bleachers with a thermos in my hand, cheering even when the team was down by 30. I never drank, never cheated, never once laid a hand on him in anger. I carried his mother's coffin with my bare hands. I held him as he cried until he fell asleep on my chest. The weight of his grief crushing us both, but making me hold tighter. And somehow, that turned into this. A man who could look at me and see only inconvenience. It's a strange thing, feeling like a stranger in your own home. He started getting bolder, telling me to keep the TV volume down. Your hearing's going, Dad. Just let it go. Moving my belongings from shared spaces, my boots suddenly banished from the hallway, my tools boxed up and stuffed in the garage like clutter. Then, one night, I found my recliner in the driveway, the old brown leather one, the one I'd fallen asleep in for decades after long workdays. Rain had darkened one armrest. The smell of wet leather hit me before I even reached it. No room for it, he said when I confronted him. He didn't look up from his phone. Trying to keep the place modern? That same week, I drove to Columbus to meet an estate attorney. It was an hour and a half each way, gray highway stretching under a slate sky. The office was quiet, wood-paneled, smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. We discussed assets, liabilities, leverage. He asked questions with the calm patience of a man used to cleaning up family messes. At one point, he set his pen down, looked me straight in the eye and asked, "What outcome do you want, Mr. Miller?" I didn't pause. I'd been carrying the answer like a live coal. I want the house back. I want the business stake back. And I want him to remember who put the damn roof over his head. The lawyer's lips tightened, almost a smile, but not quite. He nodded once and said, "Then let's begin." We drafted a revocation of business interest agreement, structured under my legal 51% ownership of his LLC, the same one I helped him file almost a decade ago. With that single document, I could freeze operations, cut access to funds, and transfer managerial authority. He had never updated the records, never filed amendments, never thought I would remember. We filed a notice of intent via USPS, certified mail, return receipt requested, tracking number printed, delivery confirmation expected by Wednesday. The sound of that green certified mail slip tearing off at the counter was strangely satisfying. Small, sharp, final. At home, things were shifting. He was short-tempered, snapping over dinner choices, rolling his eyes when I asked about his day, telling Megan that I was just going through a cranky old man phase. I smiled, because Wednesday was coming. When the envelope arrived, I was in the living room, newspaper open, morning sun slanting across the hardwood. I heard the mailbox clatter, the screen door squeak, then silence. He ripped it open right there in the driveway, sunlight bouncing off the glossy white paper. I could see his shoulders stiffen even through the window. A beat later, the door slammed open. "Dad, what the hell is this?" I lowered the newspaper slowly, like an old sheriff in no hurry. "What's it say?" He paced, paper rattling in his fist. "Revoking my ownership? You can't do that. I built that company." I folded the page, set it down, and looked him square in the face. My voice was calm, almost quiet. "I gave you that company. I can take it back." His face turned red, jaw tight. "You're not serious. I'll sue." I didn't flinch. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said the words I'd been holding in my chest for 6 months. This house, that business, the savings, the truck, the life you've been living, none of it was built by you. It was all built by a man you decided to push out with a brochure. He didn't respond, just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, and maybe he was. That night, he left the house, tires squealing, taillights disappearing into the dark. No dinner, no words. I sat alone in the kitchen, same place he slid that brochure across the table. The house hummed with the low, lonely sounds of night, the fridge cycling, the clock ticking, the distant rush of a late car on the road. And I realized something. He thought that piece of paper would be the start of my ending, but it became the beginning of his. The days after that certified letter felt like the calm before a storm. He tried to pretend nothing had changed. He still came home late, boots stomping heavier than usual, keys clattering too loud on the counter. He'd slam the door just a little harder, turn the TV up just a little louder, as if volume could drown out the truth printed on that white paper. But every gesture was smaller than the last, every brag more forced, and in his eyes I could see it, the slow, dawning realization that the ground he'd been standing on wasn't his after all. I stopped cooking for him. No more slow-cooked stews waiting when he stumbled in. No more plates set on the counter like peace offerings. I stopped doing his laundry. The hamper stayed full. The dryer sat silent. I stopped making myself invisible. Instead, I filled my evenings with paperwork, stacks of it, bank statements that smelled faintly of ink and time, receipts creased from years of pockets and glove compartments, old text messages printed and stapled, each one a breadcrumb in a trail he thought I'd never follow. The living room became an operations center. Papers fanned out across the coffee table, manila folders labeled in blocky pen. My hands worked steady, slow, methodical. A builder's hands, building a case instead of a house. The more I compiled, the more I saw a pattern. It wasn't just money, it was humiliation. Small digs at family gatherings, stories he retold in ways that made me the fool and him the hero. Moments he turned into punchlines, like the time I fixed his car in the rain before his big date. He'd retold it later as how he saved me from standing in the street, like an old man who didn't know what he was doing. People had laughed. I'd smiled then because fathers smile. But alone, that night, it had stung. Now those moments became evidence, not just of debt, but of disrespect. The night I truly knew who he'd become was at Megan's birthday dinner. It was one of those evenings where candles glow soft and wine flows easy. Megan leaned across the table, kind smile on her face, and said, "Frank, thank you for letting us use the house for this. You've got a beautiful place." Before I could answer, he cut her off. Arm around her shoulders, grin easy and wide. "It's our house. We keep it nice." I felt the room tilt, not literally, but in my chest, the weight of decades shifting. My hands clenched under the table until the knuckles went white. I thought of every nail, every beam, every Saturday spent alone putting up drywall while he played somewhere else, and I smiled, because by then I'd already filed the paperwork. I began to hint at nothing, said less, not more. Let him think I was retreating. Let him believe the old man was finally fading into the background. Some nights I'd leave the thick binder on the kitchen table, half open, just out of reach, a quiet shadow he couldn't quite name. I never pointed to it, never explained, I just let it exist. Yeah, I saw the way his eyes caught it and then darted away, the way his jaw worked when he thought I wasn't looking. He started drinking more. The wine rack emptied faster. Bottles clinked in the recycling bin like hollow trophies. I overheard creditor calls slipping into his voicemails, muffled through the walls. He'd pace with his phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp, then end the call and stomp out to the patio to breathe. Still, he told his friends he was expanding, always expanding. One evening I went down to the basement to grab my old tool bag. The air was damp, cool against my skin. Dust hung in thin ribbons where light cut down from the small window. I reached for the bag and noticed a cardboard box shoved behind some paint cans. Inside were pieces of my life. My old fishing rod, the ones I taught him to cast with, my high school championship ring, a wooden photo frame from our first family camping trip, still with a faded picture of his mother smiling by the fire. He'd started selling off my past for spending money. I closed the box and took a deep breath. No shouting, no confrontation, just a quiet resolve hardening like concrete. The attorney called the next day. His voice was calm, deliberate, the way professionals talk when they know they hold the leverage. "Mr. Miller, everything's moving along. With your majority stake and the records you've given us, we can freeze operations, redirect incoming payments, and require his personal guarantee on outstanding debts." I said, "Do it." 2 words. Solid. Final. That weekend he hosted another backyard gathering. This one was smaller, quieter, different crowd. I stayed inside, curtains half drawn. I heard laughter through the glass, strained, almost brittle, the clinking of glasses, the soft echo of a song I used to hum to him when he was a boy, now remixed and floating out of a Bluetooth speaker. I sat in the dark, hands folded in my lap, and thought about how easily love can be twisted into leverage, how what we give without strings can still be tied around our necks. Monday morning, his bank called me. Because of my majority stake, I'd been listed as the controlling party on his business account. Without my authorization, the debit card stopped working. I imagined him standing at the gas pump, card declined, trying again and again while a stranger behind him honked impatiently. I didn't feel satisfaction, only a strange, heavy calm. That afternoon, Megan showed up at the door. Her car was crooked in the driveway, as if she'd pulled in too fast. Her eyes were wide, anxious. She twisted her hands when she spoke. "Frank, what's going on? He's losing it." I leaned on the doorframe, studying her. She looked scared, but not angry, confused more than anything. I just shook my head. "He'll figure it out." Inside, I wasn't gloating. I was grieving, because every step of my plan, every signature, every form, every quiet click of a filing cabinet was a step away from the father I thought I was. But the humiliation had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. The next reveal came quietly, like the first snow of winter. Soft, silent, but undeniable. He came home late. The slam of the front door rattled the picture frames on the wall. Boots hit the floor hard. Then he stormed into the kitchen. "What did you do?" he shouted, voice raw. I looked up from the newspaper, calm, almost bored. "About what?" He threw a letter onto the table. It skidded across the wood and stopped just short of my coffee mug. County clerk's office header at the top. Notice of ownership change. Liens released. New beneficiary designations filed. His hands were shaking, face flushed. "You can't just take everything back." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. "You gave me the authority when you needed me," I said. "You never took it back. You never cared until it was too late." He sat down heavily, the chair legs scraping against the tile. His bravado cracked. For a moment he looked younger. Small, even. "You're ruining my life," he said, voice breaking on the word ruining. I stared at him, held his gaze. "I built your life." Silence swallowed the room. For the first time in years, his mask slipped. His jaw trembled. His eyes darted, looking for something solid to stand on, and finding nothing. And just for a heartbeat, I saw the boy who once stood next to me at his mother's grave. The boy who clung to my arm because the world felt too heavy. But pity doesn't erase betrayal. I got up, slowly, left him sitting there at the table, and walked into the garage. The concrete was cool under my boots. The air smelled of oil and dust. I opened the old steel toolbox again, the one that had become my silent ally, and pulled out another envelope. This one addressed to the county tax board. Another piece of the plan. Another quiet shift of power back where it belonged. When I came back inside, he was gone. The door was open just enough to let in the sound of his car tearing down the road. Taillights vanished into the distance. I stood at the window, coffee cooling in my hand, and realized something. I wasn't just preparing for revenge anymore. I was preparing for freedom. The next morning, I sat in the driveway with a cup of coffee. The air was cool, crisp, with the faint bite of early autumn. Leaves had just started to turn, gold at the tips, red creeping in. The street was quiet except for a lone jogger and the rustle of branches. I thought about the decades I'd spent building a life for someone who believed paper could erase it. About the houses I'd raised from dirt, the roofs I'd nailed against storms, the long nights spent making sure he'd have more than I ever did. And I knew the end was coming, not mine, but his. That's when Megan pulled up again. Her car door slammed softly this time. She walked slow, shoulders slumped, eyes red from crying. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like the weight of everything had finally hit. She stood a few feet away and whispered, "He told me everything, or at least he tried to. But he left out something, didn't he?" I nodded slowly. "Yes." She hesitated, looked at the ground, then back up at me. He said you'd never fight back." I looked down at my hands, calloused, scarred, built for work, not war, but capable of both when pushed. He was wrong. The envelope I mailed that morning was the last piece of the plan. It wasn't anger anymore. Not the hot, shaking kind that makes your hands tremble and your voice crack. It wasn't even revenge. It was quieter, cleaner, the calm, silent stroke of a builder, pulling the final nail from a rotten frame before tearing it down. A man making one last, measured adjustment before the whole structure shifts back into place. By the time it reached the tax board, every domino was lined up. The house, the business, the accounts, even the insurance policies, each one traced, documented, and routed back to me, legally, transparently, all using the same paperwork he had once begged me to sign on his behalf. Every dotted line he'd pushed in front of me, every casual, "Just sign here, Dad." Every moment I'd chosen trust over caution, now turned into something solid in my hands. That week was quiet. Too quiet. He stopped bringing Megan around, stopped talking about investments. The house felt different, not just because of silence, but because of what silence meant now. I knew the calls were coming, though. Creditors, lawyers, bank managers, all the people who once smiled at his big plans, now asking for signatures and payments. All the smiles replaced by invoices. He stayed up lat pacing. I'd hear the floor creak as he moved from room to room. Some nights I caught muffled curses from behind his closed door. Other nights, just silence, the heavy kind that fills a man's lungs when he realizes he's running out of air. On Friday, a thick envelope arrived for me from the county clerk's office. I sat at the kitchen table to open it. The late afternoon sun spilled across the wood, catching the steam from my coffee in thin ribbons. Inside was stamped, certified confirmation of every filing we'd submitted. Owner, Frank Miller. Controlling. Stakeholder, Frank Miller. Beneficiary, Frank Miller. I ran my thumb across the embossed seal, felt the raised edge of the paper. 3 decades of quiet work and quiet patience distilled into a few sheets that could no longer be ignored. $18.34 for certified copies, $4.70 for postage. 3 decades of silence turned into leverage with a handful of receipts. Saturday afternoon, his car screeched into the driveway. Tires spit gravel against the siding. He didn't bother knocking. The door swung open hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. He barged into the kitchen, face flushed, breath sharp, and slammed a thick stack of mail onto the counter. The papers fanned out like a deck of bad hands. "What the hell are you doing, Dad?" he shouted. His voice cracked on the last word. Too high, too panicked. "Everything's frozen. My accounts, my company, even the damn utilities. You can't just do this." I stayed seated at the table, calm, steady. I'd brewed a fresh pot of coffee that morning, and the smell still hung in the air. Warm, dark, comforting. My mug sat between my hands, heat seeping into my palms. I looked up at him and said, calm as winter air, I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself. He shook his head, face red. No, you're destroying me. I held up a single sheet of paper. The original incorporation certificate. My name printed in sharp black letters as 51% owner. His signature below mine, bold and certain from a time when he needed me. You asked me to help you start your dream, I said. I did. You never changed the paperwork. You never repaid the loans. You never once respected the hand that held you up. And now you're learning what that hand can do when you bite it. He stared at the paper like it was written in another language. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came. His shoulders sagged, the fight slipping out of him like air from a punctured tire. I leaned back in my chair, mug still warm in my hand. This isn't a game. You've been living off my name. Now you're standing on your own. He dropped into the chair across from me, the anger drained out, replaced by something smaller. For a moment, he didn't look like the man who slid a brochure across the table. He looked like someone who had built his life on sand and was watching the tide roll in. I reached for another envelope from the stack beside me, pushed it across the table. This, I said, tapping it once with my finger, is the deed to the house. He froze. His eyes snapped to mine. Fear flickered there, real fear for the first time. You have 30 days to vacate. You can take what's yours, if you can prove it's yours. Everything else stays. He reached for the envelope, but I held it back just enough for him to feel the pause. I'll be sending this by certified mail as well, just so there's no confusion. His voice dropped, almost a whisper now. You can't do this. I said nothing. Just stood, walked to the counter, and poured myself another cup of coffee. The slow, steady stream filled the silence until it felt like the loudest sound in the room. The smell of dark roast wrapped around us both. Behind me, I could hear his breathing quicken. He slammed his fist on the table. The sound cracked sharp in the quiet kitchen. You're a bitter old man, he spat. You'll die alone. I turned and looked at him. Really looked, past the anger, past the bluff, down to the scared boy, underneath. No, I said softly. I'll die free. Silence swallowed the kitchen. Outside, the wind rattled the last of the autumn leaves against the window. One loose branch tapped the glass, slow and hollow. That night, I drove to the post office. The sky was black and clear, stars sharp above the empty Ohio road. My old Ford's headlights carved pale tunnels through the dark. The heater hummed low. The dashboard cast a tired green light across my hands. I parked under the yellow glow of the single street lamp outside the small-town post office. The building smelled like paper and dust and faint coffee when I stepped inside. I handed the eviction notice to the clerk, young, polite, unaware of the weight of the paper he was stamping. USPS certified mail. Return receipt requested. Tracking number printed. He slid it into the outgoing bin. It landed with a soft thunk, like a gavel coming down. Driving home, the road was empty. The world felt strangely wide and quiet. For the first time in months, my grip on the steering wheel felt steady. My lungs felt full. The next morning, Megan knocked on the door again. Her knock was hesitant, soft, almost apologetic. When I opened the door, she stood there with tired eyes and hair pulled back like she hadn't slept. She wasn't angry this time. She wasn't pleading. She just looked worn out. He told me everything, she said quietly. Her voice trembled on everything. I didn't know. I stepped aside. Come in. She moved slowly, glancing around as if seeing the house differently now. She sat at the table, the same table where the brochure once lay. Her hands traced the edge of a placemat without looking up. You built all this? She said softly. I nodded once. I tried to warn him, tried to tell him he was pushing too far. Her voice cracked a little. But he said you'd never fight back. I smiled faintly. He said that a lot. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. What happens now? That's up to him, I said. My voice stayed calm, but inside I felt the ache of saying it aloud. He can start over. He can rebuild, but not with my name, not with my house, and not with my savings. She hesitated, looked at me as though searching for something. Hope, maybe. He's not the same person anymore. I met her gaze, held it. Neither am I. By the time she left, the sun was dipping low, painting the driveway gold and red through thinning leaves. I sat back in the same chair, the wood creaking softly under me, watched shadows crawl across the floor, and thought about every nail I'd driven into these walls, every paycheck turned into his opportunity, every silent compromise I'd made for his future. And I realized this was my justice. Not a shouting match, not a courtroom brawl, just the quiet, irreversible shift of power back where it belonged. Sunday night, I opened the old steel box one last time. The hinges groaned like a memory. Inside, there were only a few papers now, the rest filed, executed, and done. On top lay the brochure he had once slid across the table. Bright Grove Senior Living, smiling gray-haired man playing chess with another stranger in a beige sweater. Stock photo happiness. I picked it up, held it between my fingers. For a moment, I remembered the sting of that night, the way the brochure had felt heavier than any hammer I'd ever swung. Then I laughed, quietly, a single low sound that felt more like release than humor. I tore it in half. The paper ripped clean and soft, dropped it into the trash, closed the lid. Monday morning, his car was gone from the driveway. No note, no calls, no text messages trying to explain or blame, just silence. The lawyer emailed me confirmation of the final filings. The subject line was simple. Everything finalized. Inside, everything's in your name now, Mr. Miller. He has no legal claim left. I typed back, thank you, and closed the laptop. My fingers hovered for a moment before hitting send. Not from hesitation, just from the strange feeling of finality. The house was mine again, but more than that, so was my dignity. I walked outside into the cool Ohio air. Leaves crunched under my boots. The sky was pale blue, streaked with slow-moving clouds. The road stretched ahead, quiet, waiting. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not young exactly, but unburdened. Inside, the kitchen was silent. The table was clean. The chair across from mine was empty. It would stay that way. A week passed, then 2. No word from him. No phone call, no letter. Not even a petty message trying to claw something back. No half-hearted, you'll regret this. Text. No desperate plea disguised as anger. I kept waiting for the fight. Some kind of final swing from a man who once strutted through life as if he ruled the world, from the comfort of a house he never built. But nothing came. Just silence. And that silence, it wasn't empty. It was victory. Not the noisy kind you shout about. Not the kind with fireworks or champagne. This was quieter, heavier, more complete. The kind of victory that fills a room without making a sound. Every morning I'd get up, pad across the cool kitchen tile, and brew a fresh pot of coffee. The sound of water filling the reservoir, the hiss and sputter of the first drip. Familiar, grounding. I'd sit at the same kitchen table he once tried to erase me from. The same table where he slid that brochure across the wood as if my life could be filed away in a folder. The brochure was long gone now, shredded, burned in memory if not in flame. The bitterness, too, had shifted. No longer raw or hot. It had settled, cooled, hardened into something cleaner than rage, something that tasted like freedom. I began moving my things back into place. My old recliner, rain-stained but still solid, returned to its rightful spot in the living room. I took my time, inching it back until it faced the TV exactly the way it had for decades. I ran my hand along the armrest, feeling the familiar grooves worn in by years of tired evenings. My boots lined up near the door again, just as they had when this house was first mine alone. Sturdy, scarred, honest. Tools rehung on the garage wall with care. Wrenches and saws placed back where muscle memory knew to reach. Every drawer he had reorganized, every quiet attempt to erase me, I put back the way it had always been. Not out of spite, out of ownership. This was my home again. Each reclaimed object was a quiet flag planted in a familiar ground. A silent declaration. I am still here. This is still mine. One morning, while sorting through old paperwork, I came across a shoebox buried behind tax files and warranty manuals. Inside were photographs. Some bent, some faded, edges curled from years of handling. But each one was a window into a life I'd built before it fractured. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, camping trips where we burned marshmallows and laughed until our sides hurt. There was one picture of him asleep on my shoulder during a long drive back from Cedar Point, his small face smudged with powdered sugar from elephant ears, his hair sticking up from roller coasters and lake wind. I remembered the soft weight of him then, trusting, safe. I didn't cry, but I felt it. The dull ache of a man who lost something long before he realized it was gone. You can love someone and still mourn the version of them you'll never see again. I don't hate my son, but I don't trust him anymore. And that's a different kind of death. The slow kind, quiet, irreversible, not marked by funerals, but by empty rooms and locked drawers. Trust doesn't explode. It erodes, and once gone, it doesn't come back the same. One day, a call came from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring twice before picking up, the kind of cautious pause you learn after months of lawyers and paperwork. It was Megan. Her voice was soft, careful. "Hi, Frank. It's me." I hadn't expected to hear from her again. For a moment, I pictured her standing awkwardly on my porch months ago, eyes rimmed red, trying to bridge a chasm she hadn't dug. She said he'd moved out of state, trying to start fresh. Said he'd left behind everything, the business and the debts, even her. Said she was sorry. I told her she had nothing to be sorry for. She was quiet for a moment and then asked, almost whispering, "Do you regret it, taking it all back?" I paused, looked around the house, the morning sun spilling gold across the floor, the quiet hum of the fridge, the smell of strong black coffee filling the air. My hands rested on the kitchen table I'd built years ago, solid oak, still mine. "No," I said finally. "I regret how far it had to go, but I don't regret taking my life back." There was a small sound on the line, maybe a sigh, maybe a quiet sob she didn't want me to hear. She wished me well. I wished her the same. Then we hung up. The line went dead, and with it, the last tether to that chaotic chapter. That night, I stood in the garage, lights off, door open. Cool autumn air drifted in, carrying the faint smell of leaves and damp pavement. The street was empty, still washed pale under a single streetlight. I leaned against the doorframe and looked out at the road. I remembered him riding his bike in wide loops up and down that stretch of pavement, the way his training wheels rattled when he was small, how he once fell, scraped his knee, and came running to me, tears streaking dirt down his cheeks. I'd scooped him up, carried him back inside, cleaned the cut with hands gentle enough to hold both pain and love. Now I stood alone. The same road stretched before me, but the boy was gone, and this time I was the one about to take the next step forward. I got in my truck, old but reliable, dented fender, cracked leather seat, but an engine that turned over with that familiar low rumble, the kind of sound that feels like an old friend clearing its throat. I eased out of the driveway slowly, headlights sweeping across the front of the house. My house. Not leaving forever, not running, just moving forward. It felt like leaving something sacred behind, but not in sadness. More like paying respects. The road stretched long and open. The sky burned soft orange at the edges, streaked with gray that hung like worn-out memories. My hands rested easy on the wheel. No tremor. no weight pulling them down. For the first time in years, I didn't feel used, or forgotten, or dismissed. I felt clear. There's a kind of revenge that's loud, messy, scorched earth, the kind that leaves only ash. And then there's this kind, the quiet kind, the kind that reclaims, rebuilds, restores. He wanted me gone, but I stayed. He tried to erase me, but I left my signature on everything, this house, this land, this life. They remember who built them, and now so does he. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you raised, loved, or gave everything to, and still stood back up stronger, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your story in the comments. Because quiet men don't stay quiet forever. Sometimes we build empires in silence and reclaim them with thunder.